Hey, what's up, sports fans? Welcome to Common Sense Sports Talk. My name is Andrew Freeman, and in today's episode, I'm going to be continuing my 2019 NFL preview series, taking a look at the NFC North. Now, before I get started with this preview, I just wanted to say if you like this video and if you're a fan of my content and this channel as a whole, please leave a like and subscribe below. It goes a long way towards building up this channel. And if you have any thoughts on this episode and this specific topic with the NFL or sports in general, let me know in the comment section below. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts and start a discussion down there. If you want to follow me on Twitter as well, you can do that. My Twitter account that you can follow is in the description below. So without a further ado, let's get into this preview. We're going to start with the Detroit Lions here, who had a bit of a frustrating season last year in their first year under Matt Patricia as head coach. Going to the second year, the big question I have for them is, have they bought into his culture that he's trying to bring into this organization, where he's bringing that Patriot way? He was a defensive coordinator there before he got the job with the Lions. So he's trying to be kind of like, I won't say trying to imitate Bill Belichick, but he's trying to infuse that type of culture that Bill Belichick established with the Patriots and bring that to Detroit with the Lions. So, and you can see that with some of the additions and some of the personnel moves they made in the offseason, starting with free agency. You look at their big move, bringing in Trey Flowers, defensive end from the New England Patriots on a 5-year, $90 million contract. It's a lot of money to be paid for a guy that isn't really a number one true pass rusher, not an edge guy, not really an interior guy either. He's kind of a hybrid, you know, jack of all trades type of player along the defensive line, where you can line him up and rush him from all over the place. But he's a very good player overall, a borderline star talent in my opinion, and he's a guy that is going to fill a lot of roles on this team, on their defense at the defensive line position. Matt Patricia does have experience using Trey Flowers from when they were together for the first few years of Flowers' career when Patricia was the defensive coordinator there. So if there's anybody in the league that can maximize Trey Flowers besides Bill Belichick, it is Matt Patricia. So it will be interesting to see what he can do with him there coming into the next couple seasons with him on the team. You look at some of the other additions they made, bringing in Justin Coleman, cornerback, on a 4-year, $36 million contract from the Seattle Seahawks. They needed to upgrade their slot corner position. That was a huge, huge problem for them last season in the passing game. And Justin Coleman, he's one of the better slot corners in the NFL. So that was a pretty solid signing to bring him in on a market value type of contract. Some of the other moves they made on the offensive side of the ball, they brought in Jesse James at tight end on a 4-year, $22.6 million contract. They brought him from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Jesse James isn't really a difference maker, I'd say, but he's a very solid player. And this is an offense that's going to value and use the tight ends quite a bit as both blockers and receivers. So Jesse James can do both, I think, pretty effectively, and he's going to be a solid player, I think, for this offense. Another move they made, Danny Amendola on a 1-year deal to be their starting slot receiver. Former Patriot. Matt Patricia has a relationship with him already. They know how to use him in their scheme. He's a little bit older, so he's not quite the same player he once was, but maybe he can be somewhat productive in this offense. And then they also brought in C.J. Anderson at running back, who had a resurgent year with the Los Angeles Rams late last year, kind of came out of nowhere and was a huge part of their run to the Super Bowl. So C.J. Anderson, he's a nice backup running back to Kerryon Johnson right there. Nice change of pace player. But one of the bigger moves I thought they made came late before training camp started, when the Packers released Mike Daniels, who has been one of the better players over there in Green Bay for such a long time at defensive line. The Lions went out there. They signed Mike Daniels to a 1-year deal, and he's going to help make this defensive line group very scary, I think. I'll touch more on that later when I break down this roster, but another good signing for this team on the defensive side of the ball, I thought. In terms of who they lost, I didn't see any huge losses for this team in terms of impactful players. Obviously, the biggest name is Ezekiel Ansah, a defensive end edge rusher player. Now, Ansah is a guy that, due to injuries and age, he's not the same player he once was, so I understand moving on from him there. It just seems like, a few years ago, he was a guy that we're looking at as a franchise pass rusher capable of getting double-digit sacks in any given season. He's not that same player anymore, so moving on from him made sense. It didn't really fit what Patricia wanted to do on defense anyway. You also lose guys like Nevin Lawson, a quarterback, to the Raiders, Kerry Hyder, defensive tackle, more rotational player, to the Cowboys. Again, nothing huge. if anything, all they did was just upgrade those positions anyway. So, nothing really major on the defensive side of the ball. Now, I will say on the offense, they did lose a pretty big piece in Theo Riddick at running back. They lost him to the Denver Broncos. They released him later, and I think in the training camp area part of the offseason. But Theo Riddick, he's a receiving specialist, doesn't really do anything in terms of running between the tackles, and he's up there in age, but he was a guy that added a different element to their offense, I thought, over the past few seasons. And I think they're going to miss that production from him this season in terms of that receiving back out of the backfield. But we'll see how they do there. Transitioning from free agency to the draft now. This is a very interesting draft for the Lions. I like their first pick in the first round, with the 8th overall pick, selecting T.J. Hockenson, tight end out of Iowa. We know, again, Patricia trying to bring that Patriots flavor to this team. They value the tight end quite a bit. And I think he saw Hockenson as his answer to Rob Gronkowski with the Patriots. So if, T.J. Hockenson can live up to his potential, which I think he definitely could, that could be a nice pick for them because, T.J. Hockenson's a guy that I evaluated as maybe the best tight end prospect in the last 4 or 5 years. This is a guy that can block very well. He's explosive in terms of running vertically down the field. He's physical. He plays with an edge to him. And he's a guy that can create a lot of mismatches in the passing game just because you can line him up all over the field. And he can run routes from basically anywhere in a variety of different ways in a lot of different areas of the field. I would not be surprised if Hockenson breaks out this season in his rookie year and becomes a top 5 tight end in all of football right away. Now, I know usually I've discussed this in previous episodes, how tight ends, it does take a while for them to adjust to the NFL because there's just a lot of things that's going to be thrown at them that they weren't asked to do in college. But Hockenson, he's probably the most pro-ready prospect at tight end that I've seen in a long time. And I think he's going to be very productive for this offense and maybe even be the number 1 threat for them as this offense develops down the road in the next upcoming seasons. But in the second round, this is the pick that I really did not like. Jelani Tavai, linebacker out of Hawaii. I had him graded out as more of a day 3, 5th round, 6th round type of talent because he just doesn't have the athleticism that you want from a modern day linebacker. But Patricia doesn't really value athleticism, and Bill Belichick, their scheme doesn't really value athleticism from their linebacking position anyway. They value guys that are a little bit bigger, a little bit more versatile, that can stop the run and kind of be thumpers a little bit more. That's what Tavai is. He's a thumper on first and second down. He can stop the run. He can shed blocks at the second level pretty well. He can make plays around the line of scrimmage. You can abuse him in pass coverage a little bit, but he's got pretty decent instincts. Again, I don't like the pick in terms of the value, but I see where Patricia has him in terms of the role in this defense. So it makes sense that of all the teams to take a reach on him, that it would be the Lions in this situation. Some other picks that I liked for the Lions here, though, in the 3rd round, Will Harris, safety out of Boston College. Not necessarily the most explosive athlete, but a very good leader in the secondary, a guy who can maybe eventually take over as a starter for this team down the road. Maybe not this year, but he will definitely contribute at some point this season, I think. In the 4th round, Austin Bryant, defensive end out of Clemson. He was the least heralded player coming out of Clemson on that defensive line that was so dominant over the past few seasons in college football. He's a guy that I think maybe not as a contributor this season, but he's a guy that will develop, I think, eventually to be a nice, solid pass rushing specialist, situational player for this team down the line. But ultimately, my favorite pick of this draft for the Lions was actually in the 5th round when they selected Amani Oruwariye, a cornerback out of Penn State. Now, this is a guy that I thought he was more of a 2nd-round talent, so a big steal for them in terms of the value there, at least in my opinion. And this is a guy that doesn't really have elite explosive athletic traits, but he's got pretty good size, pretty good length, very good technique, plays the ball very well in the air, and he's not afraid to be physical in both the running game and at the line of scrimmage. So I think he's a guy that if he can develop pretty quickly, he's a guy that can contribute right away. But overall, he could be somebody that's a starter for this team long-term down the road. So moving on from what they did in the offseason to this actual roster and breaking it down, we're going to start on the offensive side of the ball. And I have them graded out as an above-average offense, but I think their lack of a legitimate star power and the star talent on this team kind of limits their ceiling overall. We're going to start the quarterback position. Obviously, Matt Stafford, he's been their franchise quarterback for about a decade now. And, I have him graded out as more of a low-level franchise quarterback. That's just my opinion. He's shown in the past that he can carry this offense and carry this team to victories that they, didn't deserve to be winning in the first place anyway. A lot of come from behind victories, a lot of dramatic fourth quarter shootouts that he's been involved in. Stafford is a solid quarterback. He's a good quarterback. I don't think he's a guy that you can just build your entire team around him and just expect him to carry you to a Super Bowl. He needs, some help in order to win at a high level, I think. And I think the way that the Lions are going to be trying to do this year is with being more of an old school throwback power run team. And that's kind of how this offense is built right now. You look at their offensive line, they're not really a particularly talented unit, but they're big and physical up front. Taylor Decker at left tackle, Frank Ragnow, who was their first-round pick last year, is going to be starting at center now. Graham Glasgow, Ricky Wagner at right tackle. This offensive line is set up to be very good in the running game. There is some question marks in terms of their pass protection, in terms of the athleticism of this unit. But I think that's just the mindset of their coaching staff as a whole. Matt Patricia wants to build an old-school, tough-minded team. And Darrell Bevell, he was a coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks for a very long time when they were in that Super Bowl window in 2013, 2014, when they were in the Super Bowl those 2 seasons. He values more of a power running game as well, even though I'm not too big of a fan of him as an offensive coordinator. That is his philosophy, so he's going to want to run the ball. And fortunately enough for them, I think they have the running backs where they can afford to be more of a run-reliant team. Look at Kerryon Johnson, who is looking like a guy who could potentially be a superstar at the running back position early on last year. You have C.J. Anderson to spell him occasionally in the running game. Zach Zenner has been, okay as a situational player for a couple carries here and there. But overall, you like the weapons on this team. Kenny Golladay is a good number one wide receiver. Marvin Jones is a good deep threat, even though he's not quite the same guy he once was. And I like their tight ends again. Hawkinson, Jesse James, very solid tight end group there. Like I've mentioned before, there isn't really a star talent on this team. You could argue maybe Kenny Golladay or Kerryon Johnson could step up into that level of play this season. But right now, I just think they're above average based off of the way they're constructed right now. And transitioning now to the defense, overall, I think this is a solid defense that could be a top 10 unit potentially if some guys can step up at certain positions. But I do have some questions. I do think there are some holes in this defense. But we're going to start with the strengths of this defense, and it starts up front. I think they have the best defensive line in all of football, and it's just it isn't the fact that they have a truly dominant talent on their team, but there's just an embarrassment of riches along the front line here. You start with Damon Harrison, who is their starting nose tackle, and he's a guy that he doesn't really add anything in the pass rush, but he is quite possibly the best run-stopping nose tackle in all of football. Absolutely dominant in there. You have Trey Flowers, who I mentioned earlier, who they bring in from New England, a guy who can play all across the defensive line. Mike Daniels, who, when healthy, is still going to play at a high level. Very good pass rushing guy, very big, very strong and sturdy in the middle of this defense, and they're going to rotate him in quite a bit. And then Deshaun Hand, who looked at times in his first 2 seasons like a potential star player along the defensive line. I mean, this defensive line is absolutely loaded. I haven't even gotten to Ashawn Robinson yet, who's a very good run-stopping defensive tackle for this team. They're just absolutely loaded. It's an embarrassment of riches for Matt Patricia on this team. And this is the way that this defense is going to be set up here, because they don't really have any talent at the edge position. Right now, Romeo Okwara is set up to be their starting edge player at the left defensive end position. They don't really rely on a true edge rusher. What they like to do is they like to be big up front. They're going to stop the run with their front 4 or front 3, whatever formation they're running there, because they do run a hybrid scheme. And they're going to force teams to have to throw the ball and be one-dimensional, because if they can stop the run with just their front defensive line, it makes things a lot easier for their linebackers and secondary to focus just on their coverage responsibilities in the passing game. And that's kind of what they're going to do here. They're not going to rely on any one player to create a pass rush. What they're going to do is they're going to use stunts. They're going to use different schemes and different blitz packages to create pressure on the quarterback. And that's just the Bill Belichick, Matt Patricia style of playing defense. And that's what I see this defense ultimately being this season. Now, in terms of where my question mark starts, it has to be with the linebacker position. I just don't see a lot of talent here. Gerard Davis is a good athlete, but he lacks the instincts, I think, to be a true three-down linebacker that you can build around in today's NFL. You look at Devin Kennard, who's a very good blitzer, but not a very talented player overall. Christian Jones is a good athlete, very versatile. It can line up as either a coverage linebacker or as an edge rushing linebacker in certain packages. And like I already mentioned, Tavai, he's probably going to be more of a two-down run-stuffing linebacker, more of a thumper type of linebacker for this unit. Overall, just not the most talented, kind of a below-average linebacking core here. But there is versatility. They can do a lot of different things with their linebackers, I think, that can kind of be schemed to be a lot better than the sum of its parts, basically, here. In terms of their secondary, I think they're slightly above average in terms of overall talent, and that starts with Darius Slay, who is a true number one Pro Bowl level cornerback. But they're going to need someone else to step up, I think, at the cornerback position, because right now they have Justin Coleman in the slot. He's pretty good right there. You have Tease Tabor, who hasn't really worked out as a second-round pick. I'm hoping that Amani Oruwariye can step up and be a starting-level player for this team. Otherwise, you have Rashawn Melvin there. Just not the most talented unit outside of Darius Slay. And we saw that last year occasionally where teams would kind of light them up in the secondary a few times a year there. They had a few bad games last year in their pass coverage. At safety, they're pretty solid, though. Tracy Walker and Quandre Diggs, I think, are both pretty decent at safety. Nothing really spectacular there. So those are my overall thoughts on the defense as a whole. Solid unit. Nothing really spectacular as of right now besides the obviously loaded defensive line. But we'll see if Matt Patricia can coach this unit up to be a bit better than some of the lacking talent in some areas will indicate. So overall, when I look at the Lions here, I think worst case scenario, they're a 5-win team, but I would not be surprised if this team contends for a wild card spot. I think a lot of people are, overlooking the Lions just because of the way they are historically as a franchise. And if we're being honest here, I'm not a huge fan of Matt Patricia as a coach anyway. I think the Lions, what will end up hurting them this season is their lack of a solid foundation with their coaching staff. I'm not a fan of Darren Bevel as an offensive coordinator. I think he's a below-average coordinator. I don't think he's going to get the most out of Stafford and some of the weapons that they do have on offense, and I just don't see that working there. I think defensively they could be pretty good, though, because I do like the talent up front. Overall, I think the Lions go 7-9 this season, just missing out on the playoffs. They're going to be very competitive, though, and they're going to be a tough out, I think, for a lot of different teams coming up on their schedule because they do have a tough schedule, playing a lot of good teams this year. And I think they're going to be a team that's very competitive, that's going to be in the hunt for a wild card spot all year long. But late in the season, it's just they're just going to run out of steam late in the year. So transitioning from the Lions, we're going to go to the Green Bay Packers, who had a very rough 2018 season. They fired Mike McCarthy middle of the year. There's a lot of discord, and it just wasn't working. It was just a lot of bad stuff in Green Bay last year. So they bring in a new young offensive-minded head coach in Matt LaFleur, who comes from the Sean McVay coaching tree. He was the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans last year, who were not very good on offense, but with hopefully you have Aaron Rodgers here, so you're hoping that with actually great quarterback play, he can coach up a very good offense, because that was one of their struggles last year. Their offense was not very good. But you could see from the way they approached this offseason that they wanted to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of free agency and going out there and really trying to upgrade this defense for Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers has done everything by himself, and he's had to carry this Packers franchise for a very long time, over the last 3 or 4 years really is when the overall talent on this team has really fallen apart. So the Packers this offseason, I applaud them for being aggressive in free agency for the first time in a very long time. But when I look at some of the additions here, it does leave a little bit to be desired in terms of how much money they threw out there and the talent that they got in return. So we're going to start on the defensive additions that they made. It's Zadarius Smith, outside linebacker from the Baltimore Ravens on a 4-year, $66 million contract. So about $17.5 million per season for a guy that was nothing more than a rotational piece in Baltimore. That's a lot of money there for a guy who hasn't really established himself as a true number one edge rusher. And then they double dipped at the edge rusher once again with Preston Smith, outside linebacker from the Washington Redskins, on a 4-year, $52 million contract. And that's, again, a lot of money for a guy who's been nothing more than a decent number two edge guy for the course of his career so far. Both are good players, don't get me wrong. I just question whether they're going to have the impact that the Packers are hoping that they can have this season. But they weren't done. They ended up signing and adding to their safety core, which was one of the worst in all football last year, Adrian Amos from the Chicago Bears on a 4-year, $36 million contract. Again, the value is a little bit pricey for me for a guy who's a box safety. Nothing really special in terms of creating turnovers and having a true impact in terms of taking over a game. But this safety core for the Packers last year was maybe the worst I've ever seen. So I think Amos comes in there and can help solidify their defense in the back end of their defense as a whole. So I don't mind that one as much. I've watched, again, as a Bears fan, I've watched Amos for the past 4 years. He's a good football player. He's a solid football player. And I think adding him to your team, regardless of the money value, even though it's a bit of an overpay, can only help your defense, I think, overall. And then the offensive side of the ball, they needed to address their right guard position. That was a huge weakness for them last year. I think they had Byron Bell starting for the majority of the year last year, and he was just awful, not very good whatsoever. So they bring in Billy Turner from the Denver Broncos on a 4-year, $28 million contract. Turner's a guy that he's very versatile. He can play either right tackle or anywhere along the interior at either guard spot. But he's not a very good player necessarily, but he's not a bad player either. He's fine. So I think he can help hopefully stabilize their offensive line at right guard. And there were a few losses for this Packers team. Again, they're trying to bring in a new philosophy here, a new aggressive approach. And with that said, they had to get rid of a few guys that have been core players for the last regime and really important players for this franchise over the past decade or so. So you look at the guys, some of these guys, Mike Daniels, who they released before training camp, one of the most important players on their defensive line for a very long time. Randall Cobb, wide receiver, going to the Dallas Cowboys now. They let him leave in free agency. He's been dealing with injuries. He's not quite the same player he once was, but he was a guy that had a great relationship with Aaron Rodgers. They kind of had a nice connection together, so you're going to miss that from now on. They're going to try and transition more to these young receivers that they drafted last year, so we'll see how that works out for them. Clay Matthews, outside linebacker, who was thought to be a franchise edge rusher for the first few years in his career, but injuries and age has really taken his ability to play the game. He's not a good player anymore, so I understand moving on from him there, certainly. And then some smaller losses for this team. Jake Ryan at linebacker, losing him to the Jaguars. Again, he's not a very good player, but he was a starter for the past couple of years, so you have some turnover at the linebacker position. Rashad Breeland, cornerback, he might have been their second-best cornerback last year besides Jair Alexander, so you lose him to the Chiefs. And then Nick Perry, they let him go at outside linebacker. He's not good, and he's injured all the time anyway, so I don't see that being a big loss. So going from free agency to the draft now, this got very interesting for the Packers. Again, trying to bring forward that aggressive mindset and taking some swings at a couple boom or bust type of players here, especially in the first round with their first pick and the 12th pick in the draft. Rashawn Gary, outside linebacker out of Michigan. He is a true boom or bust player. He's very raw. He doesn't really have great instincts, but he is a freak athlete, kind of a workout warrior type of guy. He's the type of player that you would build in a Madden game in terms of the athletic and physical traits that you want from an edge rusher. He's big, he's strong, he's really fast, and he plays very hard too. It's just that, again, the instincts and just the inability to use his hands in his pass rush, he's going to need a lot of work to develop his game. But he's a guy that I think could be a very disruptive player down the road for this team, a guy that you can line up all across the formation. And that's what their defensive coordinator, Mike Pettit, really values in his edge players, versatility, being able to line up all across the defensive line. Rashawn Gary gives them ability to do that. Even though I grade him as more of a late first-round talent, I understand why they would want to take the risk there. But it's tough for me with the value because there were better edge rushers on the board, particularly Brian Burns, who went a few picks after him to the Carolina Panthers. But I did like their second pick in the first round. They had 2 first-round picks, and what they did with their second one, they traded up to the 21st overall selection to pick Darnell Savage, safety out of Maryland. Now, Darnell Savage is a guy that I was very high on coming into the draft. He's very athletic. He has good instincts. He has decent ball skills, and he hits very hard despite a lack of prototypical size from the safety position. And you look at the way they want to build this secondary overall, they're kind of taking a model of what the Bears did last year with their secondary and their safety position. They had Adrian Amos, who was more in the box safety, very good in the run support, very good in the short zone area, very physical player. So they bring him in from the Chicago Bears, and now Darnell Savage, he can kind of play the Eddie Jackson role where he can kind of roam around in the 20, 25 yards down the field playing that true ball hawking free safety role and really cover up some of them mistakes in the back end of their defense. They're kind of flying sideline to sideline, being a ball hawk. So everything in that process made sense to me in terms of building up the secondary and the safety position there. Like I mentioned before, they had maybe the worst safeties in all of football last year. So to be able to kind of redo the safety position, I thought was necessary for them. And Darnell Savage, I'm very high on him going in to this upcoming season. And then you look at some of the picks they made later in the draft. I like what they did on round 2 and 3. Elton Jenkins, offensive guard out of Mississippi State. Obviously, they want to upgrade from Lane Taylor at left guard, and Jenkins is a guy that was very productive in college. He's solid, nothing really spectacular in terms of I don't think he's going to be a Pro Bowl level player, but he's a guy that can step in and be a starter right away and eventually take over for Taylor at that left guard spot. Very good all-around player, I think. And then round 3, Jay Sternberger, who was my number 3 tight end in this draft. Very good receiver. So one of the things that the Packers have been missing for a long time is a true receiving presence at the tight end position. Sternberger eventually could be that type of player for them. It might take him a couple of years to kind of round out his game, but he's a very talented, I think, receiving threat down the line. Some of the other picks they made in this draft, Kingsley Keke in the 5th round, he could eventually be a nice rotational player at defensive tackle. Dexter Williams was a big name, running back out of Notre Dame, although he hasn't really been that impressive in preseason. So overall, this is a boom or bust type of draft when you look at some of their early picks. And that's kind of what I think the Packers are valuing now. They're valuing more athletic prospects and guys that they can hopefully coach up and be productive players in the future for their team. So going into this breakdown of their roster and what my feelings are about this roster overall, we're going to start with the offense. And, of course, it has to start with Aaron Rodgers, who is one of the 2 best players at quarterback in all of football. Aaron Rodgers alone puts this team, I think, in the hunt for the playoffs, in that conversation for sneaking a playoff spot, because even though I don't think this team is particularly talented in other aspects of the team, Aaron Rodgers, when he's healthy and he's right, he is just that darn good. He's a guy that I have scars on my soul from what he's done to my Bears for the past decade or so. And you definitely have to respect him as really the boogeyman in the NFC North here for this division. But I do have some questions about Rodgers going into this year, and a lot of them are due to his performance last season. He just did not look right. I know a lot of people will blame McCarthy and his system and the knee injury that he suffered early on in the year, but he was missing a lot of easy throws that he would normally make, routinely late in the year when I thought he was starting to get a little bit healthier. Just did not look like the same guy. I know the stats weren't completely terrible in terms of the touchdown to interception ratio, but he did not have a quintessential Aaron Rodgers season last season. It was really a down year for him, I thought. And with his age, he's in his mid-30s, I think 35, I think he is, going into this year. And the injury history, he hasn't really had a healthy year since 2012, I think. It seems like every year he's dealing with some kind of nagging injury or he's missing games due to an injury. There are some questions about whether he can stay healthy this year with kind of a smaller frame, a skinnier frame at the quarterback position, and whether that can mean combined with his age, whether he's going to start to continue to decline gradually over the next couple seasons. And that kind of puts some questions in my mind whether we've seen the best from Aaron Rodgers. And I think what could help them here is Matt LaFleur coming from that Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. If LaFleur can be able to maximize the talent around Aaron Rodgers and maximize his ability and really fit his play calling style to help out Aaron Rodgers rather than just rely on him to do everything for this team, that could go a long way. But I don't know how they're going to fit and mesh together as a quarterback and coach tandem. There's already been some rumblings that Aaron Rodgers is not meshing very well with LaFleur right now. Obviously, some of that stuff's overblown by the media, but it's definitely a concern considering the way that him and McCarthy didn't really see eye to eye for the most part during their tenure together in Green Bay. So when I look at the rest of this offense, overall, like I said, coming from the Shanahan tree, LaFleur, I think, is going to be able to get this team to run the ball very, very well. They're going to run that outside zone, stretch-style running game. And they have a very good O-line to be able to execute that. David Bakhtiari, he is probably the best left tackle in all football. Corey Linsley, a very good center. And then Brian Bulaga is pretty solid at right tackle as well. And when you bring in the additions of Jenkins and Billy Turner, this is a team that should be able to run the ball pretty effectively and execute that scheme very, very well. So I like what they have at offensive line. I think they are going to be much better than they were last year. At times they were, pretty bad for stretches last season along the offensive line. So I think they could be a little bit better there. And this is going to help out Aaron Jones, I think, quite a bit because he's going to get a lot more carries this year. And this is a guy that led the league in yards per carry last year. He's very physical, downhill runner, very explosive in space. And this running scheme, I think, is going to be perfect for him. He fits it like a glove, I think. And so that's going to go a long way towards developing this offense and this running game as a whole. But besides that, I think there are some question marks with this offense, especially when you look at the receiving position. Obviously, Davante Adams, he's a top 10 receiver in all football. One of the best in the game. I have no questions there. Him and Rodgers are going to put up big numbers together. But outside of him, there just isn't really any talent at wide receiver or tight end that really jumps out to me. You look at Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he had some flashes last year as a rookie. Going to his second year, maybe he can develop a little bit more. Geronimo Allison's going to be back healthy, but ideally he's more of a number 4 receiver. He's going to be asked to be a number 2 or number 3 at times this year, which doesn't really bode well for them. He's not really that talented of a player. Jake Kumaro, who I think is a practice squad level player, but he's listed to be the 4th or 5th receiver on this depth chart. Just not a lot of talent at the receiver spot besides Davante Adams. And then at tight end, they spent a lot of money last year to go get Jimmy Graham. And I told Packers, I have Packer fans, I have friends that are Packers fans, and I told them from the start, man, Jimmy Graham is not the same player. He's not going to work. He doesn't have the explosion. He doesn't have the ability to separate. He doesn't have that mismatch ability that he once did. He's pretty solid in the red zone, but in between the 20s, he is not the same player, and that kind of showed itself last year. He is definitely not a field-altering weapon on offense anymore. He's a very average player at this point in his career, and if he's not giving you anything as a blocker, I just don't know how much you can rely on him to be on the field a lot this season because he is just not the same receiving threat that he once was. So huge questions on this offense, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because they do have Aaron Rodgers. I expect them to be a good to borderline great offense this season, depending on how Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy and whether he can mesh with LaFleur in this offense going to this year. Now going to the defense. They made a lot of moves to overhaul this unit. This has been a very big weakness for them ever since they won the Super Bowl back in 2010. They just haven't figured out the defense. They haven't been good at drafting it. Their coaching has been pretty below average at it, and they haven't developed young talent to be able to take over roles on this defensive side of the ball. Up front, you like what they have there in Kenny Clark. He's a beast. He's one of the most underrated defensive tackles in all football. Very dominant in the running game. Can also rush the passer as well. You also have guys like Dean Lowry, Montavious Adams, who's pretty solid. Other than Kenny Clark, nothing really spectacular. But I don't think that'll be a big deal. As long as they can stop the run with those other defensive linemen, they'll be pretty good up front. And then in terms of the edge position, you like the depth that they have here. Now, there isn't a true difference maker, like I mentioned before, Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. and Kyler Fackrell, who had 10 sacks last season, actually. They're all solid players, and they should be able to generate some pressure, I think, based off what Mike Pettit will do in terms of blitzing and lining up guys in different ways across the formation there. But again, they're not going to rely on one specific player to take over a game for them. They just don't have that type of talent, I think, at this edge position. They're above average, I think, but nothing really special as of right now. They have a good safety deal when you look at the secondary here. Like I mentioned, Darnell Savage and Adrian Amos, I think, are going to be very good together, and they both complement each other very well. But there are some weaknesses across this defense that give me a reason to pause when I think a lot of other people want to put them among the top 10 units in all football based off of some of the moves they make. I don't see it because we look at this defense. The linebacker position, I think, is a huge hole for them. And yes, I understand Blake Martinez is their starting middle linebacker. He's not good. I'm telling you right now, he's not good in coverage. Most of his tackles are from 5 to 10 yards down the field because he's blown an assignment, or he's blown an assignment in coverage, and he's not a very good in coverage guy. He's just, again, he's not that good of a player, and it annoys me when some people overrate him into something he's not. He's not. He's a borderline starting level linebacker, but he's nothing anywhere near remotely special in any particular way whatsoever. So you have a whole linebacker. Oren Burks got injured, I think with a torn labrum, I think, in his shoulder, so he might be out for the year. Behind him, there just isn't a lot of depth on this team. They brought in Ty Summers as a 7th-round pick. I'm not too high on him either. So the linebackers is definitely a concern there. And then at the cornerback position, there are a lot of question marks here. You have Jair Alexander, who I think is going to be a stud. He's going to be one of the best cornerbacks in all of football, I think, at some point in the next couple seasons here. But they've done a lot to address this position in the draft over the past few seasons, and the results have not worked out. Kevin King, he's always injured all the time, and when he plays, he's not very good anyway. They drafted Josh Jackson out of Iowa last year in the 2nd round. He didn't have a good rookie year, and he hasn't really shown much since. They have Tramon Williams as a veteran, bringing him back here, so he'll compete likely at the slot position, but he's not that good of a player anymore. Tony Brown, just not a lot of talent at this cornerback position. I just have huge question marks there, and whether they will be able to hold up against some of the more explosive offenses in the NFL. And that's kind of how I feel about this defense overall. There are some reasons to be positive and some reasons for optimism with this defense. Overall, I'm not too high on them as of right now. I think they're more of an average unit until proven otherwise. So when I look at this Packers team as a whole and I look at their schedule, I think worst case scenario, they're a 7-win team. I think this team is much more talented than last year's unit, although they're not particularly talented in a variety of different ways. And it really comes down to Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers has a quintessential Aaron Rodgers type of year, I think they can win as many as 11 games and potentially win the division and potentially make it the playoffs as well. As of right now, I think they're going to go 9-7. I think they're going to be fighting for a wild card spot in this division, and I would not be surprised if they're in the playoffs again this season. Again, I have learned in the past not to doubt Aaron Rodgers. He is just absolutely spectacular as a quarterback, and until proven otherwise, I'm not going to doubt him whatsoever. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt for this team. So moving over to the Minnesota Vikings now. Last year was an absolutely disastrous, disappointing season for them. This is a team last year coming off a 13-3 year where they made the NFC Championship game. They were expecting to win a Super Bowl last year. Don't get it twisted here. They went out and they signed Kirk Cousins to that 3-year, $84 million contract, and it just did not work out. Their offensive line was atrocious. The defense took a step back from the year before when they were the best defense in all of football, and they couldn't figure out a running game. They had problems with their offensive coaching staff. Just a lot of things went wrong for the Vikings last year, and they needed to make some different changes, I think, this offseason to kind of help them out there. So what they did, they brought in a new offensive coaching staff here. Well, sort of. They brought in Gary Kubiak to be an offensive consultant and offensive assistant for this team, and they're going to install that zone run, stretch running system for this team here to kind of help out that running game. And they also made some additions on the offensive line, bringing in Josh Klein from the Tennessee Titans on a 3-year, $15.5 million contract to start at either guard spot to kind of compete there. He's an average player, but I think he fits the system very well in terms of being a mobile, athletic guard to kind of fit that zone stretch scheme. They made some other additions well to kind of make up for some of the losses that they had. They lost Sheldon Richardson, Nick Easton, Latavius Murray, Mike Remmers, Andrew Sandejo, some guys who were very productive for them over the past few seasons, but they just did not have enough cap space to keep them. So they go out and they sign Shamar Stephen from the Seattle Seahawks, defensive tackle on a 3-year deal. He's a good run stopper. He's going to mix very well next to Linval Joseph in terms of two big physical guys along the line of scrimmage that can stop the run. You like what you have there. They also brought in Sean Mannion, quarterback from the Los Angeles Rams, to be their backup quarterback in case anything kind of happened with Kirk Cousins. Again, not a lot of activity for this Vikings team during the offseason. The biggest storyline in free agency was actually the fact that they were able to keep Anthony Barr from the New York Jets, and he kind of took less money to stay with the Vikings there. So that was kind of an interesting storyline for them this offseason. But overall, not too many major changes in terms of the actual roster. They kind of redid their offensive line a little bit, but nothing too crazy. So going to the draft, I did like their first-round pick quite a bit. With the 18th overall pick, they got Garrett Bradbury, center of NC State. He's very athletic, and he really fits this Gary Kubiak running game very, very well. He can get to the second level. He's got good technique. He's a very smart player. I think he's going to be a guy that could potentially change this offensive line right away, potentially. They don't need to be a great offensive line. They just can't be one of the 2 or 3 worst in all football, which is what they were last year. If they can be somewhat average, that would go such a long way. And Bradbury, as a rookie, could have a very big impact, I think, on this team early on. He's a very, very good player. I was very high on him coming into the draft. And you look at later what they did in the draft. In the second round, Irv Smith, tight end out of Alabama. They needed to add more of an explosive receiving threat at the tight end position. That's what Smith is coming out of Alabama, an explosive athlete, a guy that can be a receiver vertically down the field for them. They really didn't have a third receiving option last year, so maybe he can help out there eventually down the line. You look at in the third round, obviously they lost Latavius Murray, who was more of their power back last year, and they got Alexander Madison, running back out of Boise State, to kind of fill that role. I thought that was a little bit of a reach there. He's more of a fifth-round talent for me, but Madison is going to fill that Latavius Murray role. He could be very effective as a power back for this team. In the fourth round, they added to that offensive line once again. Drew Samia, offensive guard out of Oklahoma. I thought that was a pretty solid selection for them. Oklahoma had the best offensive line in college football last year, and Drew Samia was a huge part of that offensive line for them. Other than that, some other picks that they made, they had a lot of picks in the 6th and 7th rounds. So some that stood out to me, Armani Watts, defensive tackle out of Arkansas. He could be a solid run stopper, a rotational piece for them along the defensive line. I like Chris Boyd, cornerback out of Texas. This Minnesota team has been one of the best in the NFL at drafting and developing cornerbacks over the past few seasons when Mike Zimmer has been the head coach here. So he'll be another guy that they add to the pipeline. He's very talented. He slipped through the off the field and other concerns that weren't on the football field. So maybe he can be a guy that can eventually have a role for this team going into the future. So when I break down this roster overall, we're going to start with the offense. I think this is an offense that is above average as of now. They could be very good, I think, with Gary Kubiak kind of taking over the scheme here, brought in more as a consultant and assistant coach for this team. Obviously, it starts at the quarterback position. I am not too high. I'm not going to buy into Kirk Cousins at the moment. I've just seen too many games and too many big moments where he just hasn't shown up and played at the level where you'd expect a franchise quarterback to be. I remember the Week 17 game last year against my Bears where he just folded like a taco. That entire Vikings team folded when really they needed to play at their best. The Bears had nothing to play for. The Vikings had everything to play for. And you could just tell the way Cousins played that he was scared out there. And he just the moment was just a bit too big for him. And I've seen that way too many times with him at quarterback. It's definitely a concern for this team because there will be so many games out there where he's going to look very good, and he's going to be throwing the ball all around the field to Thielen and Stephon Diggs. They're going to put up some big numbers, and the numbers are going to look very good once again this year, I think. But overall, until he can prove to me that he can step up on the big stage and make those big-time throws consistently that you want from a franchise quarterback, I'm not buying into it as of right now. He's going to have to prove me wrong, I think. But I think one thing that will help him this season is I think their offensive line is going to be improved. They made a bunch of different changes to their interior this year. Obviously, Garrett Bradbury is going to be the starting center, moving Pat Elflein from center to left guard, where he's more suited, I think. Josh Klein at right guard for them. And with the new scheme, that kind of they will be able to generate a little bit more of a running game, I think. And speaking of the running game, I think one thing that'll help them there is if Dalvin Cook can stay healthy. He's very explosive when he's in the game and when he's right, but he just hasn't been on the field enough to be a true number one running back that you can kind of build your offense around. So I think he could have a big year if he's healthy in this scheme because he's very explosive in the open field. He's a guy that's very good as a receiver out of the backfield, and he's going to have a lot of big, long touchdown type of runs this year. We've kind of seen that in the preseason so far. But if he can't stay healthy, it doesn't matter. And that's a big storyline, I think, worthy of looking out for this year is the health of Dalvin Cook, because that could take their offense to a whole new level, I think. In terms of the receivers on this team, they obviously have one of the best 1-2 punches at wide receiver with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. Both of these guys are excellent receivers, but they don't really have a third option, I think, as of right now, that you really can be confident in. And looking at the tight end position here, obviously Kyle Rudolph, I think he's one of the more overrated tight ends in all football. He's an atrocious blocker. He doesn't really do anything down the field as a vertical player. He's average as a red zone receiver. He's very good at those dump offs where he's very reliable there. But I think, he isn't anything special at the tight end position. You're hoping that Irv Smith can step up and be a true force in the middle of the field there for you at tight end. And then the receiving position in general, outside of those top two players, just isn't good whatsoever. They just don't have a lot of talent there. Laquan Treadwell has been an absolute bust for them as a first-round pick a few seasons ago. Going to the last year of his contract, I think it's very likely that they cut him at some point before the season starts. Looking at guys like Chad Beebe, Jordan Taylor, Dylan Mitchell, who's a rookie, elite round pick for them. These guys are going to need to step up because if they can't find a third receiving threat, that's just going to limit the upside of this offense overall because teams are just going to focus on Diggs and Thielen and just take those guys out of the game, I think. And we've seen that at times last year where teams would focus on Thielen and Diggs, and it really limited what they could do on offense in the passing game when Cousins couldn't go to those two guys consistently. So overall, I think they're an above-average offense. They're going to have some weeks where they're going to put up a lot of points, but there's just going to be others where I think the lack of a truly special offensive line and Kirk Cousins might have a rough week here or there, and the lack of diversity in their weapons will make it tough for them to score at some points this season. But luckily for them, they have a very good defense. Mike Zimmer, I think, is going to have this unit as a top 5 to 10 unit once again, like they always are. There's a lot of talent all across the board here. You start the defensive line here, and they're just stacked with guys that can stop the run and get to the pass and be pass rushers for this team. You look at Danielle Hunter, really broke out last year. He's one of the most underrated 4-3 defensive ends in all of football. Everson Griffin, when he came back, he showed that he can still be an impactful player as that second edge rusher for them. Linval Joseph in the middle, an absolute beast in terms of stopping the run. And there's some good depth here as well. Stephen Weatherly, is a nice third edge rusher to have on your team. Jaleel Johnson in the middle of that defense there is a nice ascending player, I think. Overall, the defensive line is absolutely loaded with talent. They're going to stop the run. They're going to get after the quarterback. And that's just one of the reasons why this defense is going to be so good, because when you go to the linebacking core now, they have a nice 1-2 punch with Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr. Now, Anthony Barr, he's a guy that I think gets overrated by a lot of people because he is a kind of jack-of-all-trades linebacker that can do a bunch of different things in your defense. And that's kind of how Mike Zimmer has used him throughout the years, kind of doing a lot of different roles within the defense. But he doesn't really excel at anything particularly well. He just does a lot of different things for this defense overall. But, again, Eric Kendricks, good player. You like what they have there. That's a pretty solid 1-2 punch, and they can do a lot of different things with their linebackers there. But the secondary really is the strength of this defense, I think. You start with Harrison Smith, one of the top 5 safeties in all of football still. Very good in the box. He's not necessarily the greatest athlete in the world in terms of generating turnovers and being a ball hawk, but he's a very sound tackler. He's very versatile. You could use him in a lot of different ways, and he just affects the game in so many different areas, I think, in defense. He's a guy that you always have to look out for in every single snap. And then at quarterback, you have Xavier Rhodes, who, again, he's not the same player he once was 2 years ago when he was a true lockdown coverage specialist. And he's certainly not a guy that is going to have a lot of ball production in terms of creating turnovers, but he's still a very good cover corner. You have Trey Waynes, nice depth at the quarterback spot overall. Mackenzie Alexander, Mike Hughes coming back from injury. They drafted Chris Boyd once again. Holton Hill is a guy who stepped up for them last year. Overall, just a lot of depth and talent at that quarterback position. And then Anthony Harris, who stepped up as their safety last year, besides Harrison Smith. He was a guy that kind of came out of nowhere, was very good late in the year for them last year. They got a lot of good production out of him. So this defense, they're loaded. They have a lot of talents all over the place. And I think they could easily be a top 5 defense this year if they could really get going to where they were in 2017, where they were just absolutely came out like gangbusters that season and were just so effective at third down and stuff like that. Very, very good defense. So overall, when I look at this Vikings team, I do have questions about their ceiling. I think at best they're a 10-win team. This is a tough schedule for them. I have questions about Kirk Cousins. The offensive line is still in flux a little bit. And the offense is what kind of concerns me a little bit more than the defense, that's for sure. The defense, I know it's going to be good. I think worst case scenario, they win 7 games. Again, they're going to be competitive regardless. They're going to be in the playoff hunt all year long. Overall, I have the Vikings going 8-8 on the season, just missing out on the playoffs once again. And that would be tough for them because this team has a lot of talent in a lot of different areas, and they're very deep on the defensive side of the ball. They just need to put it all together on the offense and get that side of the ball going once again. And we'll see if they can pull that off this season. But for me, 8-8, missing out on the playoffs, kind of mediocre. That's how I see this Vikings team this year. So moving on to the final team in the NFC North, we have the defending NFC North champion, Chicago Bears. And I'm just going to say this up front. There is no way I can be 100% objective with my evaluation here because, this is my team. I've grown up as a diehard Chicago Bears fan ever since I was a young kid. And but I try my best to be as objective as possible with this one. And I thought for the Chicago Bears going into this offseason, obviously coming off of the just heartbreaking loss to the Eagles in the wild card round, the double doink, I can tell you from experience that I did not recover from that loss for about a month there. That wound is still fresh for me still. But they were entering an offseason where there were just a lot of questions because they didn't have a lot of cap space. They had some starters that they needed, that they were going to lose potentially in free agency just because they did not have the room to keep those guys. And, of course, they needed to upgrade the kicker position because Cody Parkey was absolutely atrocious last year. So when you look at some of the losses that they had, Adrian Amos and Bryce Callahan are the 2 big ones at safety and slot cornerback. Losing those guys to the Packers and Broncos, respectively, they needed to replace those guys at those starting positions. So what they did, they went out and signed Buster Screen, cornerback from the New York Jets, on a 3-year, $16.5 million contract to take over Bryce Callahan's role at that slot nickel corner position. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Screen, and I thought the contract was a bit too rich for my liking for his value as a player, but I think he can fit very well in this defense. Obviously, they're transitioning from Vic Fangio at defensive coordinator to Chuck Pagano. And Pagano loves to be a little bit more aggressive than Vic Fangio. And I think Buster Screen kind of fits that mentality a little bit more. So, again, when Bryce Callahan went down with injury late last season, this defense did not miss a beat, I thought, with Sherrick McManus in there at that nickel corner spot. So it's not really about how talented they are at that position. It's whether they have a veteran guy that won't absolutely lose you the game at that spot that kind of fits the mentality of the defense. So Buster Skrine, in that sense, I think that was an okay signing. It's not a huge backbreaker of a contract. They can get out of it after two seasons. So not the worst deal in the world for them. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they went out and they got Cordero Patterson, who's kind of a running back, wide receiver, hybrid type of player. Matt Nagy loves his gadget plays. He loves his gadget players, and that's what Patterson is. He's a guy that's going to take a lot of sweeps and jet sweeps and reverses. He's a guy that can line up in the backfield and be more of a power back. They get him on a 2-year, $10 million deal. I thought was a good value for them, especially when you consider that he's the best kickoff returner in all of football right now. That really upgrades the special teams for the Bears because their kickoff returning unit was absolutely atrocious last season. So Patterson definitely is an upgrade in that capacity at least. And, of course, they traded away Jordan Howard at running back, who was a very productive back. I love Howard as a player, but we have to be honest here. He was a guy that kind of held back this offense a little bit because he wasn't a very versatile player. He kind of just did not fit Matt Nagy's system. So they bring in Mike Davis, who was a third down specialist for the Seattle Seahawks last year. He's got good size. He's got some wiggle to his game. He's a nice receiver out of the backfield. He can pass block a little bit. He's going to have a role in this offense as a running back here. And on a 2-year, $6 million contract, you're not really invested that much in him. So you got to like that signing there. But the big one for them was getting Clinton Dix to replace Adrian Amos at the safety position on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. Now, a lot has been made about who's better here, Clinton Dix or Adrian Amos. And my response to that would be that I think they're both very similar caliber players. They both have different strengths and weaknesses to their game. Obviously, when you look at Adrian Amos, he's a guy that's more of a box safety. He's very good in the 10 to 15-yard range, covering those short area zones, being in run support. A very nice tackler, very reliable in coverage. He isn't really going to blow any coverage necessarily. And he's very physical as a player overall, just a very solid presence in the secondary. While Clinton Dix, he's more of a gambler. He's more of a true ball-hawking free safety. Not very physical in the running game. He's going to miss a few tackles here and there, and he's going to blow a few coverages because he is very aggressive. And he's got, more ball-hawking instincts. He's got better ball skills overall than Amos. So he adds a different flavor to this defense. I don't think he's necessarily a worse player, though, or a better player. He's just I think you kind of just have a lateral move there for less money. So I thought that was a good deal for the Bears there to kind of bring in a guy that can be a serviceable starter for them this year. And he's playing on a contract year again. So he's going to be motivated to play his best football now because he wants to secure the bag and get a big contract next offseason. So you're hoping that you can get the best out of him if you're a Bears fan with Clinton Dix. So moving on from free agency to the draft, the Bears did not have a lot of draft capital because of the trade for Khalil Mack, obviously, and the Anthony Miller trade last season. So they did not have a first or second round pick. But in the third round, they traded up for David Montgomery, running back out of Iowa State. This is a guy I was very, very high on. I had him as a top 3 running back in this class. He's got very similar traits to a guy like Kareem Hunt, for the Kansas City Chiefs. And now currently with the Cleveland Browns. Both are bigger physical backs that have a very good agility, very good quickness, very good vision and instincts when running the ball between the tackles. He kind of fits that inside zone run very well. And David Montgomery is very polished as a route runner. He's got very good hands. I would not be surprised if he goes out there and has a Pro Bowl level season in his first year as a rookie because he can do it all out there for your offense. I know Matt Nagy loves to spread the ball around. He likes to use a variety of different running backs, but Montgomery, I thought he had some special traits coming out of college, and so far from what I've seen, he looks like he could be potentially very special in this offense. You look at later in the draft, in the 4th round, Riley Ridley, wide receiver out of Georgia, doesn't really have explosive athletic traits, but he's a very good route runner, very polished, good hands, good at making those jump ball type of receptions there. I don't think he's going to be anything necessarily special, but I had him great as a second-round talent. So, again, in the 4th round is good value. I think he could potentially be a very nice number 2 or number 3 wide receiver in this offense, and he fits what Nagy wants to do very well as a polished route runner for this team. And then the 6th and 7th round, I thought they made a couple of nice additions to this team. First of all, Duke Shelley in the 6th round, cornerback out of Kansas State. I think he's a guy that they're grooming to be their eventual replacement for Buster Skrine. at the slot corner position. He's undersized. He was coming off an injury, so he kind of flew under the radar during the draft process, but he's got very good closing speed. He's very feisty, very sticky in coverage, solid ball skills. He's very twitchy as an athlete as well, so you like to see that out of your slot corner. He's going to need some time to develop. He's going to need to put some weight on in order to survive at the NFL level. But overall, I think Duke Shelley could be a guy that could be a very nice contributor down the road in a couple seasons, and he offers some decent depth in the present. And then in the 7th round, they took a chance on some athletic prospects. We look at Kareth White, running back out of FAU, and Stephen Denmark, cornerback out of Valdosta State, a Division II school, I believe. Kareth White, we're going to start with him. He's a very fast running back. Doesn't really have any wiggle, not really experienced as a receiver, but he's a guy that I think is going to contribute as a backup at kickoff or punt returner. He's definitely got some explosion in the open field, and you can give him the ball in space on offense on some of those gadget plays. I think he can be a little bit more effective in that type of capacity. I don't see him getting too many carries, though. I'm not even sure he's going to make the team, but he definitely does have some upside with his speed. Stephen Denmark, then, he's a total project at corner. He's got very good athletic traits. You look at 6'3", 220, 440 type of guy. Used to play receiver in college, but he transitioned to cornerback last year. Not afraid to get physical and hit, but he's been dealing with injuries. So I think he's a guy they're going to stash on either the practice squad or on injury reserve and kind of try and develop him next year to be a contributor. So going into this roster breakdown for the Bears, we're going to start with the offense here. I think this offense could very well be a top 10 unit this season. And it all comes down to their quarterback, Mitch Trubisky. I'm very high on him coming into the draft in 2017, and he shows some flashes of being a potential franchise guy. But there has just been a lot of inconsistency, especially saw that last season. He's going to have to take another big leap if this offense is going to be as good as some of these surrounding parts, because this team is absolutely loaded. When you look at the skill position players. They vastly improved at the running back position. Obviously, Tariq Cohen is one of the most electric playmakers in the entire game, but David Montgomery, he's going to be, again, I've already mentioned it before, Montgomery could be very special at running back. Mike Davis is a nice change of pace guy. You love the talent at running back. They're a vastly improved unit over last year's team. They should be able to run the ball a lot more consistently because they were not good at running the ball last year whatsoever, I think. I think they were 21st at the running back spot in yards per carry, so they're going to be a lot better there, I think. And then they're absolutely stacked at wide receiver. Look at Allen Robinson as your number one. I think Anthony Miller could be an absolute superstar. He was my favorite receiver coming out of that draft last year, and he showed some flashes. He had 7 touchdowns last season, and he did that playing with really one arm. He had a separated shoulder for the majority of the season. So he's a guy that could be very, very good. He reminded me of Steve Smith a little bit coming out of the draft out of Memphis. And then Taylor Gabriel, a nice deep threat. Very solid role player on this offense for them, but the depth here is just so impressive. Javon Wims has looked like a man amongst boys in training camp. He's looked very impressive as a 7th-round pick last year. I think he's a guy that could have a role as a number 4 wide receiver. Cordell Patterson, again, as kind of that gadget player. And we haven't even mentioned Riley Ridley, who is probably not even going to play that much this year, but I think on a lot of teams he would probably be the number 4 or number 3 option for them, because he's a very talented and polished route runner for this team. Now, if there are any concerns for this offense besides Trubisky and his development, it has to be the tight end position and the depth at offensive line. Starting with the tight end position, obviously you have Trey Burton, who they signed last year. When healthy, he's a solid tight end for them, a good receiver, decent enough at blocking. I don't really have any concerns with him in terms of just staying healthy, basically. But behind him, you have Adam Shaheen, who hasn't really panned out so far as a tight end prospect. Ben Broniker, who's a decent backup, but nothing really special there. He can kind of be the backup to Trey Burton at that U position that Matt Nagy calls it, where he's more of the versatile receiving tight end. And just a lack of depth here is what concerns me. Ian Bunting has been impressive as a UDFA for this team as a rookie. I don't even know if he makes the roster, though, because Bradley Sowell is now their blocking tight end specialist, it looks like, for this team, that they're going to try and keep him on the roster. So overall, I'm not too impressed with the tight end unit as a whole there. I think they're fine, but nothing special necessarily. And again, the depth at offensive line going there just really concerns me, especially at offensive tackle. The front five is very good, though. One of the best starting five units in the NFL. Look at Charles Leno, Cody Whitehair going to left guard. He was a center for the first few years in his career. Now he's going more to his natural position at left guard. James Daniels, who they drafted in the second round last year, he's going to be playing his natural center position, which is nice for there. So I think they could be better in the interior in terms of that aspect. And then Kyle Long, finally healthy. Didn't have to deal with any rehab from surgery this year. I think he can return to his Pro Bowl level form where he was one of the better guards in all football 4 or 5 years ago, early on in his career. So you like the interior, and then Bobby Massey's decent at right tackle. Nothing really special there, but he won't really lose you a game as tackle either. So offensive line, if they're healthy, they're going to be fine. If they're not healthy, I have some serious question marks about the depth here. Rashad Coward right now is pegged to be their swing tackle, and he's a defensive lineman trying to transition to right tackle. It hasn't really worked out so far. I like Alex Bars, who's a nice rookie for them as a UDFA, but he's a guard, and they're trying to transition him to left tackle a little bit more, and just in case they have an injury there, but he's just not a natural tackle. So those are really my only question marks, though. Other than that, this offense is stacked with talent. I think Trubisky is going to take that next step. I'm really confident in him being a top 10 to 12-ish quarterback for his career. In terms of compared to other quarterbacks in the league at the time, a top 10 to 12 guy. Overall, this offense could be a top 10 unit this year. I'm very confident in them reaching that ability next year. In terms of the defense, a lot of people have been talking about them regressing due to the coordinator change and due to losing some starters and due to just statistical regression in general. But I just don't see it. I think this unit is the best defense in all football. They were the best defense in the NFL last year, and they could be even better this season. Obviously, a new coordinator in Chuck Pagano. In his 1 year as a defensive coordinator with Baltimore in 2011, that defense was the best in football. He's inheriting, I think, a little bit more of a talented unit overall than that defense. And when you look at this unit as a whole, there's just star talent all over the place. You start up front, obviously, with Khalil Mack, who's one of the top 5 players in all of football, probably the best edge rusher in all of football. When you really think about it, he was really dominant last year, but he didn't have a training camp. He dealt with injury for the first time in his career, and he just had to adjust to a new scheme, a new city, and all that stuff. So in many ways, last season was a down year for Khalil Mack. Imagine what he's going to do this year with a training camp, having a full offseason to work on his defense, being adjusted to the locker room, and being in the city of Chicago. Khalil Mack could have an historical season as an edge rusher, especially with Chuck Pagano, who got the most out of Terrell Suggs in his 1 year as a defensive coordinator there. Robert Mathis with the Colts had his best season as a pass rusher when Chuck Pagano was running the defense in 2013. Khalil Mack could have a very special year, and he's going to be helped out by a very talented unit. We look at Akeem Hicks, one of the better interior linemen in all football. Eddie Goldman, a very good nose tackle for this team. Just a lot of star talent up front. At the linebacking core, you have Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan, one of the better linebacker duos in all of football. I think Roquan Smith could very well have an all-pro level, Pro Bowl level season, and we could be talking about him as a top 5 linebacker by the end of the year. Again, he was another guy that came in with no training camp. It was a little bit out of shape early in the year, but once he got going, he was very productive near the end of the season. And from all the reports from training camp indicates he could be even better this season. So I'm very excited to see him develop. And then the secondary, Eddie Jackson, he could very well be the best safety in all of football. I might take Derwin James when healthy, just because Derwin James doesn't really have any weakness in his game. If there's one weakness for Eddie Jackson, is that his tackling does leave a lot to be desired. But if you're looking for just a pure ball hawk, sideline to sideline safety, there's no one better than Eddie Jackson. He's got some of the best instincts I've ever seen from the position. Very Ed Reed-like in terms of his ability to anticipate and read routes and different route combination, read the quarterback's eyes and all that stuff. And I mean, he's had 5 defensive touchdowns in his career so far in only 2 seasons, and he could have had 6. Another one last season that was called back in the Cardinals game due to an offsides penalty. This guy's just got crazy, ridiculous instincts for the position, and I think he just He's just very good. And we combine guys on the secondary like Kyle Fuller and Prince Mukamara, who had their best years in their careers last year. This defense is absolutely loaded. They have solid role players like Bilal Nichols on the defensive line. Leonard Floyd is a nice jack of all trades linebacker for them. Again, if Buster Skriniar and HaHa Clinton-Dix can work out, then that secondary is going to be good once again. I really like Deion Bush as a box safety for them. They can use him for big nickel and dime packages as a third safety. Overall, the defense is absolutely loaded with talent, and they're just great all across the board. Now, there are some question marks, I think. First of all, we look at the depth at the edge and linebacking position, especially at edge. You're relying on Khalil Mack and Leonard Floyd to stay healthy because Aaron Lynch is just okay as a backup. And then behind him, you have Kylie Fitz, Isaiah Irving, just not a lot of talent at that edge position. If there's an injury there, then their edge rush could be very compromised, I think. And then at linebacker, Nick Kukowski has been their backup linebacker for a long time. He doesn't really have any coverage skills, though. They brought in Kevin Pierre-Louis, who's more of a special teamer. Joel Igabigawin, I can't even say his name, but their fourth rounder from last year, Joel Iggy. He's a good athlete, good in coverage, but I don't like him as a tackler. He's still very raw. And then at cornerback, while they're good at slot position, I have some question marks about their outside depth. Kevin Tolliver is slated to be their third outside corner right now. If Kyle Fuller or Prince Mukamara goes down, and I'm not too high on him. But overall, if they can stay healthy, I think this defense is going to be just as good, if not better, than last year. They're just freakishly talented all across the board. So overall, for the Bears, I think worst case scenario, if Trubisky doesn't develop and this defense does take a little bit of a step back, I think they're still an 8-8 type of team because there's so much talent that I just don't see this team really taking that big of a step back. If anything, they're going to take another step forward. And if they do, they could be as good as 12 wins once again this season. They're playing a little bit of a tougher schedule right now. There's a lot of good teams they're going to be playing this year, a lot of good quarterbacks, a lot of explosive offenses. So it's going to be a lot more difficult this season. But I think this team is up to the challenge. I think they're one of the more talented units in all of football. Overall, I have them going 11-5 this year, winning the division once again, and hopefully, as a Bears fan, they go on a big playoff run to a Super Bowl. So those are my thoughts on the NFC North. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you liked what you got from this content in this video as well as this channel, please leave a like and subscribe below. The next video is going to be the AFC North, so I'll be transitioning over there for my next video in this series. Thanks, guys, for watching.